So we are back. All right, we are ready to pick up where we left off with this ominous-looking pyramid. Sir
Yes, sir.
Sam is back with us.
Absolutely.
Oh man, so
Ready
with
to
the
get started.
yes, indeed, and the fun continues. So we are off rightly.
Okay, so Eastern religions is a very interesting study. There's so much to take in, and I think a lot of the Westerners of the world really don't study it because there's just so much to process. So I'm going to try to break it down to you as simple as I possibly can. Basically, there's four big ones: Buddhism, you got Hinduism, you got Islam, and you've got Judaism.
Yeah, I'm sure you got something to say on that one.
I mean, traditionally and historically, Judaism and Islam have been more associated with, Abrahamic religions, therefore much more influential in the West than typically in the East. Obviously, with Islam, there's a high influence in the Middle East with them, but to kind of group together Islam and Judaism with Hinduism and Buddhism under the umbrella of Eastern religions is one of the gross oversimplifications that I'm not sure is justified.
Yeah, I was kind of cringing at that statement. Also, just the statement that I'm just going to explain Eastern religions as though that's like a single block where they're just like homogenous, and then also just overlooking. You've just got so much more diversity in that, and it's so much more complicated. Like in China, it's like Taoism and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Shintoism.
I'm not sure if you'll get into that, but like Taoism is a good example of, like, in the Eastern mind, the kind of the boundary between philosophy and religion is much more blurred than in the Western mind. I feel like, at least in the lay person's mind, because Taoism is very philosophically oriented, especially Confucianism.
Yeah.
But its influence in Eastern culture and society is very much on the status of what we Westerners may say is a religion or religious influence.
Mm-hmm.
So that boundary between philosophy and what we might call religion in the mind of Easterners is much more blurred. Kind of elaborate on one of those kind of differences or nuances that we can speak to Eastern religions that may be just kind of like skimmed over otherwise.
And I have to just throw out there, just the passing thought. I recently finished reading a book. It was more on the geopolitics side of things. It was by a Chinese, I want to say he was an economist, as I recall. But, talking about, the rise of modern China and its culture, but everything was tied to their ancestral culture and religion. As let's put it this way: communism was not an emphasis by any means. But it was all Confucianism. And to not even make a passing reference, like the biggest country in the world, and it's such a big part of their identity. Reference to this is like, yeah, it's all Buddhism, Hinduism. It's like,
yeah.
And then to lump Islam in there, when you look at like the history of India, where it's like the Muslims and the Hindus have like rough history with each other because they don't get along, and there are huge differences where you can't lump them together.
Is a religion that basically believes that you can achieve enlightenment. One of the big things right now is yoga, and as you can see there's the chakras on the screen, and you can actually release the universe's energy that you have, which is called a serpent spirit. Once the spirit is released, it's actually called the Kundalini spirit. Then you have something called a Kundalini awakening, and then you have something, manifestations called Kriyas, and where people, they shake violently, or they have manifestations of euphoria and they just love everybody. But we understand that Buddhism is a long progression of demon possession. When you're doing yoga practices, you're actually making your body like some sort of antenna, where you're actually allowing the full possession of dark satanic serpent spirit called Kundalini to take over your body. Now, Hinduism is a very interesting religion.
Yeah, the yoga point is an interesting one. Is, I think, worth kind of elaborating on, because he might make it the practical point later based upon what he just said. Like, doing yoga makes you a antenna to attract demonic possession. Therefore, Christians should not do yoga. Well, that gets into the notion of or I guess a subject that need to understand the, I guess, roles of demons and their impact on the Christian life and spiritual warfare, what we've discussed already. Specifically for regenerate Christians, like you think of First John, for example, that the evil one cannot touch us. Kind of this notion that, for example, Daniel Strange speaks to the notion of subversive fulfillment, and it's this kind of this paradigm for understanding what the gospel does to false religions. And it's the gospel subverts false religions in that it completely undermines the fundamental principles that false religions are built upon, and demonstrates that false religions are what they are, that they're false and that they're wrong. But it also fulfills false religions in that since we are made in the image of God, we are homo adorans. We are intrinsically worshipers of God. Because of sin, because of our twisted nature and darkened hearts, we exchange the knowledge we have of the one true God and exchange it for vain idols. So since we are intrinsically made to worship, and because of our sinful natures, we will still worship something, but we refuse to worship the one true and living God, but we will worship idols. So all false religions kind of are predicated on the reality that we are made in the image of God and that we are to worship something. And the gospel presents that information and the means to worship who we were originally made to worship, and kind of restores to us and brings to light that knowledge we've continually suppressed in our sinfulness. So the gospel subverts false religion, but the gospel fulfills false religions.
And
we can apply that notion, subversive fulfillment, to specific kind of elements within false religions, and we can apply it to, for example, yoga. We can see how the gospel subverts the demonic, the false religious notions of yoga as kind of a worship practice. The gospel destroys that. However, it also fulfills it, and therefore is capable of redeeming it. So we can, for example, engage in the physical motions, the practice of yoga. Like we can stretch, we can do downward facing dog, we can do child's pose, we can do all of those things. But because we are in Christ and because we have the power of the gospel to transform culture and transform creation to submit to Christ's lordship, we can have a confidence that when we do the stretches of yoga, that we are not worshiping demons. We do not attract pagan spirits to ourselves by doing yoga, because Christians should understand, or at least be able to some extent articulate what I just articulated. Like Christians shouldn't ignorantly just be doing willy-nilly. They should know kind of the roots and the history of certain practices like yoga, but they should also be able to understand how Christ has transformed themselves and how Christ can continue to transform culture through them in the power and proclamation of the gospel.
And to jump in there on that, kind of like bringing it back to sort of Spencer's concern here, Mr. Smith's concern, I do sympathize with that concern. So like I've had my wife ask me, is like, can I do yoga as a Christian? And I like, even my own take on kind of the practical application, some of the types of things you were just talking about, I've kind of told her, it's like, well, probably don't be getting into yoga videos, but the exercises and things you learn from yoga, that religion's not so powerful that it now has a monopoly on those poses, a monopoly on stretching, a monopoly on, you know what I mean? So it's like,
Yes. Yeah.
I'm uncomfortable when I see Christians doing yoga where they're doing the whole thing we are watching, and it's the facing a certain direction, feel the earth as you breathe. I'm like, that's
Oh,
getting into a
absolutely.
religious practice.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
it's not so powerful. If we make it so powerful that you can't even do the physical exercises or anything, you're basically saying that this religion's more powerful than Christ himself. You know, if a person who is associated with Hinduism once stood on one leg, well, now standing one leg belongs to them, it can't be reclaimed, is where a lot of times it seems like Christians almost take this sometimes. Anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
And a quick thing I will throw in there, just about this clip is it's a thing with Spencer Smith that drives me crazy, is he'll like try to summarize something, and the summarization will just be a listing of like trivia facts about the thing, but not an actual look at the fundamental basics of it. So Hinduism, right? We're discussing no discussion of their basic anthropology, worldview, you know, their view of God, whether
Yeah.
God is personal, it's just they do yoga, they do these different things. It's kind of
Yes.
like, okay, those are interesting things, but this is kind of a tendency that we're going to see come back. This, oh my goodness, it's like when I listen to James White's debates, he's always complaining that people in the modern world struggle with categorical thinking, you know, that being able to organize, separate things into categories, and it definitely comes into view in a lot of this, and that was what was jumping out here to me. It's like, those are interesting thoughts, but anyway, anything else to add on this part?
I think I'm good.
All right.
Actually, there's hundreds of gods in Hinduism, but the main five are Shiva, Rama, Ganesha, Vishnu, and Krishna. It's multiple gods manifesting themselves in multiple different ways, and so therefore you have hundreds of deities. So, and then also you got Islam, the five pillars, if you will, five main practices of Islam. You got to have your profession, which is your shahada. You got to pray 5 times a day, which is your salat. You got to give alms to the poor, which is zakat. You got to do fasting, which is sawm. And then also you got to have a pilgrimage to Mecca once in your life, which is your hajj. So, but the thing is, with all these religions, they're actually all looking for a leader. The Buddhists are looking for something they call the Maitreya. And then also in the Islamic faith, they're actually looking for someone called the Mahdi. And then also the Hindu world is looking for a coming leader, and he's called the Kalki. The Hindu Kalki is actually someone who rides a white horse. Does any of that sound familiar to Bible-believing Christians?
Should we comment on that for a second?
Sure, you can go ahead.
The ability to collapse everything down into a single grouping by sort of like cherry-picked similarities is just gonna honestly drive me crazy. You know, like mentioning all of them. Well, the problem with Judaism is in the Old Testament there is a Messiah prophesied, and they turn away from looking at him. They literally ditch out on it. That is the problem with Judaism. They ditched out on it. So one of these out of the figuring, I remember the first time I watched this having it bug me, because I just tried to get through the Gitas and Hinduism. I was trying to learn about it. And so I just read a little bit of it. And so I remember the first time I watched this, it bugged me. So I went and looked through there, and it's like, to a certain extent, you know, in Hinduism, a lot of the traditions, you're looking at this kind of unending cycle of destruction, chaos, rebirth, you know, a collapse, you know, and it starts over again. So he's looking at it with a Christian point of view on time. Time linear, it starts here, it ends with the Messiah coming. It's like the Hindus aren't even thinking of it that way. So
very cyclical.
The Buddhism one about drove me crazy, just in the sense that you know, Buddhism has as much variety as the Christian world in it, you know. And
yes, and that was my concern. It's like, I would assume both of us aren't as well versed in other world religions as we could be in terms of like our general knowledge, for example, of Buddhist eschatology. However, one can wonder whether it's like, okay, is what Mr. Smith is doing here, would it be parallel to saying, yeah, Christianity believes that when the end time comes, that all the Christians that are on the earth will be raptured up, and then there'll be a 7-year tribulation, and basically present a dispensational eschatology.
I would guess
And
it's like that, but then throw in there, and then Mother Mary is going to come and meet them all, and then
right.
some of them are going to be made gods. Just like collapse it all in there, throw in the Mormonism, throw in the Catholicism, everything.
Well, yeah. There's either you can collapse all of them, or you can just take one school of thought and present it as the entire. This is like what all Christians believe, and that's just false.
Yeah.
So like the worry is like, is he doing that for these other world religions, or it's like, yeah, all Buddhists believe in this understanding of their eschatology, like all Hindus believe in this, and all Muslims believe in this, and it's like, I'm, and that's why I wanted to say, like, we're not as well versed as we could be on world religions in order to like correct him, but I am skeptical or suspicious of his claims, because I don't just want to like take a Wikipedia article and then say, okay, all Hindus must believe what that article says.
Well, I mean, I am totally on board with you there. And like you said, I haven't, I'm not an expert or a scholar on all this stuff, but even just the seminary student passing knowledge / curious mind, like I've listened some, some academic lectures on the basis of Buddhism. Was it, oh my goodness, what, Siddhartha's the name of the founder. And you're talking about his principal foundational ideas. They're not tied to the end of the world. They're not, you don't even need to believe in,
they're not tied to history at all. Yeah,
I know, like I've known Buddhists who are hardcore atheists, you know what I mean, who are still practicing Buddhists because they still believe in these philosophical principles.
Yeah, and that's what makes like Christianity so unique. That it is tied to history, that you need the incarnation and the crucifixion and the resurrection and ascension of Christ that actually happened in history to have Christianity, whereas in Buddhism, the Buddha might have not even existed, but Buddhism can still exist if the Buddha never did.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just to throw in there, I already mentioned the Judaism one that just doesn't fit for a parallel at all. Islam, once again, I'm not a great scholar or something, but I've read the Quran, and I'm going to tell you that's definitely not focal in the Quran itself. Now, I realize it comes from the Hadith, but even there, I mean, you're talking movements within Islam that you could kind of think of as a little bit more of a sola Qurana kind of movements. I mean, you have movements that are more focused on just the Quran, not the Hadith. Ergo, this wouldn't be a focus with them. You know what I mean? It's just, yeah. Anyway, that's it. So, said my bit there. I probably dragged it out too long.
No, it's good.
All right, let's continue here.
That was a quick treatment of Eastern religions.
Yeah. Well, basically, there's
and they didn't even talk about Judaism.
Throw in the point here. There's a point where I realize you have to oversimplify stuff to make it more digestible.
Yes.
But there's a point at which if you simplify it so far, it stops being useful. The point of the simplification is to make it more easily grasped so you can categorize the information. If you simplify it so much that all the distinctives are lost, it becomes utterly useless or even borderline dishonest sometimes.
And the occult works. It's really not that hard, but I want to explain it to you here in this video. God gave the ultimatum to mankind in the Garden of Eden, saying, if you eat of that tree, thou shalt surely die. Well, Satan comes along and he says total opposite. You shall not surely die. Well, you have two opposite ideas here. And so what Satan does is he tempts Eve with hidden knowledge and with freedom from those rules over there. There's a whole nother world of knowledge out there that you can have opened up to you if you'll just disobey that. It's definitely not worship God, and it's not worship Satan. So the occult basically is summed up in this: do as thou wilt.
I mean, I guess you can lump, because he had hidden knowledge and freedom. I just thought it would be better summed up what verse 5 says. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.
Yeah.
that it's not just about knowing something special and being able to do what you want. It's about the pride of being like God, which is the fundamental reason or temptation given by the serpent.
And this is where you get into your sort of like Van Til, the ultimately as humans trying to be sovereign, even Eve trying to be sovereign over this. She doesn't submit to God. She takes upon herself to put herself in God's place, making the decision. I also find it interesting. So his whole argument has to be built on this idea that it's hidden knowledge, because he goes into this sort of like esoteric, becomes like a 4-letter word to him by the end. But it's all based on the hidden knowledge thing. The thing is, like you said, Satan doesn't promise him that, and to a certain extent Satan promises Eve, he truthfully promises to her, because pretty much what he says comes true. Your eyes are opened, you do become more like God, knowing good and evil, but now you're cursed and all that. But so it's like, it's not like he's giving her hidden knowledge. He's telling the truth, just minus the finer details of it's going to be terrible and it's going to be a curse on you and bring death.
Yeah. Well, he is right when he says, like, when the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die." Like, that was
okay. Fair point. Yeah. Fair point.
The father of lies.
Yeah. Fair point. I did skip past that.
But you are right in the sense of, like, the point that I think you're especially bringing out is the cunning and cleverness of the serpent to mix deceit and truth together.
And the ultimate temptation, like you said, is basically to rebel against God and put yourself in his place.
Yes.
Do whatever you want. That was Satan's plan for Eve, and that's what he said. Just do what you want to do. And listen, Satan doesn't care if you worship him or whatever. He just is concerned that you're not obeying God and serving God. So really, just do what you want to do. And if you do what you want to do, ultimately you're doing what he wants you to do. Okay, so the occult is very difficult to see because it takes on different names, but the common ideas have basically been the same throughout the centuries. Now, one of the big names was Helena Blavatsky, and what she taught is that truth is found in all of these religions. But the thing is that it's like there's chunks in each of them that are correct, and so we're going to just find those chunks. And what we're going to do is we're going to take all of these pieces that we find where truth exists, and we're going to take all of that and merge that all together. She called it theosophy, which was a merger of theology and philosophy. This is what the occult is. It's the grand merger of truth and error. They've been doing that forever, and that's what they're doing now. The most famous occult symbol right now is...
I just have to make the passing comment. This is a thing that pops up a lot, where it's like, you can find a person that helped to do one thing, but all of a sudden that makes this person the de facto owner of everything associated with that idea. It's like, it's like, Abraham Lincoln made the Emancipation Proclamation, so therefore Abraham Lincoln set free all slaves all across the world, throughout all of humanity. It's like, and my goodness, and I shouldn't be too mean to him, but the Helena Blavatsky thing's about to drive me crazy. It's Helena, but anyway, that's my own problem. That's my own gripe. But the Helena thing. But he's saying, this is what the occult is. He draws what this one person's ideas kind of were, which I still think are somewhat playing loose, fast and loose, is what she thought anyway. But what one person's ideas are, okay, this equal sign the occult. Well, what about the occult that existed for all through the Middle Ages? What about the occult that existed in France in the 1700s, in England in the 1600s? I mean, for goodness sake, in the New World, in the colonies even. It was around. It didn't just, so just because one person comes up with some sort of syncretism, they now own it with this sort of logic.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And it's one of the first things I thought of was just like when he's outlining kind of the pick and choose what truths you want and which ones you don't, and incorporate it into your own personal worldview. Is like, is this not just the postmodern epistemology that permeates much of Western society and culture today? Mm-hmm. And if so, then you have to say virtually everyone who doesn't say otherwise is an occultist, like according to his logic. Kind of this essentialist identifications with theosophy and occultism. When as you've been saying, it's like, I'm not sure if that kind of essential identification is warranted or justified. And I mean, the other thing that I thought of when he was outlined, and this is more of a critique of not this video or Mr. Smith's presentation, but of theosophy and this notion of like gathering truth from different religions and philosophies and gathering it into one. And that's just one question: by what standard?
All right, we will continue from here. All right.
That bumper sticker that you see quite often, but you probably don't realize what it is, but that is the occult. Okay, so in the world of the Theosophants, you try to take bits and pieces of all religions and merge them together. How do you navigate which to take, which not to take? Well, what they believed is that there was a higher power who could tell you all that, and these were called the Ascended Masters. And so you have people here on planet Earth who need the knowledge that the Ascended Masters can give you, but the main way that they did that was something called an astral projection. These people actually, they believe that their soul can leave their body and meet face to face with these Ascended Masters and gain that knowledge. Then they can come back down and share that knowledge with mankind and other people. Now, in many forms of the occult, the eschatology views that they had at the end times was that eventually these Ascended Masters eventually come down and condescend back to Earth, and they would, lead the world into a golden age. Blavatsky actually taught that the human race was not ready for that, and so we had to get more knowledge. And eventually there would be enough people on the planet that were enlightened enough to please the Ascended Master, and the world would accept these people and accept what they called, just like the Buddhist people, they called the Maitreya, the one world leader. And that's what they were looking for. There were people who had such divine knowledge imparted to them that they actually achieved another level of humanity, almost like a godlike status. And they believed that the first one was named Buddha. And they believed that the second one was actually named Jesus. And they do believe that there is another one that's coming, and they are still actually looking for this one.
Okay, so many things wrong.
Take it away.
Okay, when it gets down to it, first off, the whole point of this video is to prove that there's this, third Adam coming, the devil's false antichrist type false messiah coming, and it's imminent, right? Okay, all of the things presented, they apply to literally the entire history of every anti-Christian, anti-God, rebellious religion that humanity's devised since the fall. I mean, I'm sorry, but you talk about the ascended ones, the out-of-body experience. Muhammad in the cave, anyone? Joseph Smith, anyone? I mean, okay, be honest here. You could try and make the case of Moses or whatever, but this is it. Humans have to gain knowledge from above the earth, or we're stuck. We can't get any further. So we either have to actually get the real knowledge from God, or if we're opposed to God, we have to be deluded into thinking we got it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so there is no basis here to kind of build up to this, like we feel you can actually show that we're closing in on the end, because guess what? If you take a cursory look of history, there's been crazy religions thinking stuff that they might not have called it astral projection at the time, but ancestor worship, trying to connect with their dead ancestors. I mean, obviously they're doing it in the time of the kings in Israel, right? Saul goes and tries to talk to Elijah.
That's exactly what I was thinking. He tries to talk to Samuel in the Witch of Endor.
Yeah.
These things aren't new. They've been around for a while, and to kind of draw this pattern to culminate in this bracketed off period of history that we find ourselves in right now, I think is actually very characteristic of the very narrow-minded historical consciousness typically characterized by usually like a dispensational eschatology that's like things, the end times are right around the corner because things are getting worse and worse. I've been alive for 40 years, and I can tell you in my living of 40 years, things are worse off now than when I was born. Well, it's like, why is your one generation worth of living, why is that the standard bearer for judging whether literally the final hours of the of the cosmos is here?
It's almost like a narcissistic take on history, to be honest.
I mean, it kind of is. You kind of feel bad to articulate it in that way, but it is at bottom arrogant and narcissistic. And I think it's not a self-conscious arrogance or narcissism, but at root it is, because it's this in principle elevation of one's own historical moment, the neglect of a broader historical consciousness and historical awareness, and then making conclusions on your own narrow perspective on your own time frame of living. Whereas if you just take a step back, because it's, I mean, this is one of the main argumentative points in regards to different millennial views, especially in regards to like post-millennialism, for example, where it's like, if you ask the question, where was true righteousness found in the world when Christ first arrived on the scene? Well, it's found in one nation, and it was in Israel, because that's where the law of God was, and that's where Christ came. And now you ask the question, where is true righteousness found? Literally all over the world, because Christ reigns and he has commissioned his church to go out and preach the gospel and make disciples of all nations. And those people who have been made disciples and have been genuinely saved manifest Christ's righteousness. So the righteousness of Christ has been spreading through in the church, through the preaching of the gospel, all over the world. So if you have that broader perspective of 2,000 years, and you used the standard of Christ's righteousness kind of as the variable to measure, the world is actually a whole lot better than it was when the nations were enslaved to darkness, to Satan's schemes. So that I think is that's the other end of the spectrum in regards to that broader historical perspective. And I just think that this, where he's going, just like the Antichrist is coming soon, because all of these religions and all of these philosophies are converging at this historical moment. It's just very characteristic of a dispensational American eschatological mindset.
It's a very specifically American eschatology, because you think about a lot of it is very fixated on, well, Western eschatology, I guess you could say, in the sense of like, it's getting so bad in America. But it's but it's growing out of control from the point of view of the Communist Party in China. They can't stop it. You know what I mean? It's like, that sounds really good. I mean, they've got more Christians there than we do here. I mean, and they're growing faster than we're going down. So it sounds like things are getting better, just not here.
Yeah. And I think it's the Pew Center for Religious Research, where they do really in-depth kind of statistical research and predictions in regards to religious affiliations. And I think for a while now, it's been predicted just like the global South will kind of become, if it isn't already, the major hub of Christian values and the Christian faith, as the West and global North in general becomes more not necessarily secularized, because that entire hypothesis has kind of failed in returns will become more and more
retraditionalization thing's real. It's not completely secularizing.
Yes, exactly. That the retraditionalization, but still kind of the Christian values becoming less and less popular in the global North compared to the global South.
Yeah, absolutely.
As evangelism happens there, and Christendom kind of manifests itself.
And really quickly, in the context of Mr. Spencer's video here, I've got to point out this, like, you're presenting this idea of this false, third Adam coming that's pretty much a non-biblical concept. I mean, you could read it into certain dispensational type stuff, but we're definitely not basing this on much scriptural basis up to this point, and I don't think it gets much more from here. But he's taking occultic Eastern religious prophecies at face value as though those are accurate sources of predicting. It's like, you are aware that we don't believe these religions, right? You are aware that we aren't supposed to be counting their prophecies as a legitimate source here, but his source is the idea of a documentary he struggles with, because the whole citing sources and presenting evidence is a little rough, but this shouldn't be a source for us, period, on principle.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
Anyway, let's continue here.
Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Got a couple Dragon Ball Z quote.
You live in the entertainment era of humanity.
Yep.
The thing is that all of these movies that are coming out now, they're all the same. There is an intergalactic tyrant who is coming to Earth, and the only hope that we have is to stand behind this superhero man to oppose this tyrant coming from the sky. And, whether it be the Matrix or whether it be the DC Comics or the Marvel Comics movies, and what is happening is that the Prince of the Power of the Air, Satan, who controls the media, he controls the airwaves, he controls all of that, is manipulating people and programming people for the tribulation period, where they will stand in the Valley of Megiddo and oppose the coming of Christ, and they will have their leader, their general, the Antichrist, and they're going to oppose that galactic tyrant coming down. Now, I want you to notice that the past several years, the most successful and prominent of these movies has been the Marvel comic movies with the Avengers. The whole Thanos plot line that they had is basically the book of Revelation told from Satan's perspective. Thanos is this tyrant that's coming from outer space, and he is going to take over the world. And so the world has to stand behind these superheroes. The Antichrist will have power. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Revelation 13. These people will have super-like powers. The one thing I find significant, a hero steps forward to take on this tyrant, and that hero is a person with one of his eyes darkened.
Wow.
And so he, with the same...
Should we stop here?
We're
getting into the good stuff now. I'm pretty sure
this is like such a good example of you're reading your Bible in light of everything that is not the Bible. The fact that you're connecting Thor of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and his design, his costume design, to Zachariah's prophecy, it's just mind blowing to me. And
hey, that's the first time I've also ever heard the exegesis of the Prince of the Power of the Air is the airways. I think this is yeah. Oh my goodness. I gotta hop back really quickly and look up Zachariah 11:17. Yeah, he's had a he had one of his other videos where I can't think of this one or one of his other videos where he elaborated on how it's revelation from Satan's point of view. And if you break down the logic of the story, it ends up being a complete mess if you think about the movie.
Oh yes.
Yeah, it's just like it's like the most cherry-picked, arbitrary watching of the Marvel movies. And I'm not even a Marvel fan. I don't even really particularly like the Marvel movies, but I've seen the Avengers, so I know what the deal is. All right, Zechariah 11:17. So let's check our references here. All right. Okay, and the Lord said to me, take up into the instruments of a foolish shepherd. For lo, I will raise up a shepherd in the land, which shall not visit those that be cut off, neither shall seek the young one, nor heal that is broken, nor feed that standeth still, but he shall eat the flesh of the fat and tear their claws in pieces. Woe to the idle shepherd that leaveth the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm, upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. Yeah, we are talking the concept, the context of false rulers in Israel, where God is calling a curse upon them. We're not talking the end time specifically. Now, of course, we could say bringing the true shepherd's probably looking forward to Christ, but this is not looking forward to the Antichrist.
Yeah. And I think, like, I know we're doing the KJV, but the ESV brings out that kind of cursing language a little bit more clearly. It says, woe to my worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. May the sword strike his arm and his right eye. Let his arm be wholly withered and his right eye utterly blinded.
I guess the other obvious point to be is Thor should be missing an arm too then, or have a withered arm. Oh man. And let me see, I think was the context of Zechariah, we're talking during the exilic time period, so we're still talking a context of like coming off of literal shepherds as in rulers of the people that led them into eventually captivity by rebelling against God. We're not talking the literal Antichrist. I mean, you can make the case here, he's since we're going all Spencer would tell you should disregard the Hebrew and the Greek and all. But it's still it's very obvious when you get into this. It's talking in a much more specific context with a specific historical idea in mind.
Yeah. And I mean, and the other major avenue of argumentation is simply the genre and the hermeneutical aspect of it too. Like, he is obviously very, very strongly presupposing a literalistic interpretation of prophetic literature.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's we don't have to get into that, but that's just, it should be made clear, like, the way he's interpreting it is by no means the like default or end interpretation of this passage.
Oh yeah, and I mean, you look up here, verse 14. You're talking an absolutely explicit historical context as well.
Yeah,
you are not talking the end times, and I feel like you don't need to have gone to seminary to even realize this. You don't even need some class on proper exegesis and whatever. You just need to have a basic understanding of how to read English text to follow this translation. It's not saying you don't need to go to the Greek or Hebrew on this. The English gets it just fine,
I'm missing that the Bible says the Antichrist will have missing. He opposes this tyrant. They had the final battle, the Battle of Armageddon, where this evil tyrant loses. I mean, people are being programmed to receive the mark of the beast. They're being programmed to stand behind a one-world leader. They're being programmed to oppose Christ. All I'm saying is that there's some striking similarities there, and I believe that the modern media is being used by Satan to program people to receive a world leader with superpowers, and that's going to be the Antichrist.
And so with when you say like striking similarities, well, it's like, by what standard are you drawing these similarities, or what set of criteria, and why should we believe you in this case, other than sensationalized plausibility? We can, with not just Marvel movies, but with several other movies, interpret them through the lens of a Christian worldview and see how, for example, with the MCU, the theme of good guys in the end conquering the bad guys. That is a Christian eschatological theme. It's like with this amount of justification that Mr. Smith gave for believing that the MCU is teaching a satanic eschatology, we can make the same case that they're teaching a Christian eschatology. Because when it comes to film, and this is an entirely gloss over subject, and again, like it would be too much of a tangent for him to go into this in this documentary, but it's like, I this past semester I took a course on Christianity and film, and there's just that's an entire course worth of a subject, that it's like how you get into the interpretation of the art of cinema, and how messages and worldviews present themselves within films themselves, and how the viewers or the audience of films interpret them in light of their own worldview. And for example, when he's talking about how like everyone gathering behind one leader to rise against the evil tyrant, is conditioning them to align with the one world leader Antichrist in the future. It's like, can you do that with Lord of the Rings? Merry and Pippin following Aragorn to fight the armies of Sauron. It's
well, remember, the basic idea of this is from Satan's point of view. So it's supposed to be that they're resisting Thanos being God or Christ coming to take back his creation, and they're resisting the evil. But it's like, but Thanos isn't a creative deity. He's having to gain power to get the stones and all the other stuff going on. So he's not God, but Thor actually is technically a type of deity. So couldn't we say that that's actually everyone getting together, unifying, and having a religious awakening to follow a god?
Well, yes, and also furthermore, I just remembered, to debunk his whole like right eye thing in Norse mythology, especially in the comic books, like there's this notion of it's basically a parallel with Odin, like Thor losing his eye parallels his father who lost his eye, and it basically, in the comics, it amounts to Thor becoming more powerful. Like the fact that he loses his physical vision, he's able to gain the mental vision, and that's a tangent. But it's just the main point of why I say that is that there's an internal reason for why they did with whatever they did with Thor that has nothing to do with this demonic, satanic like intention in the film itself.
And this whole idea of humans gaining supernatural power in comic book movies means we are now about to have the Antichrist come in who's going to have superpowers. Does that mean that like he was getting ready to come during literally all of pagan history ever? I mean, I remember trying to get through an English translation of Jason and the Argonauts. It's like every single story in that thing is just, oh, they went and asked this god and they gave him the power of whatever to go out and fight this monster and become a great hero, and then they got to marry the most beautiful girl around and got super rich and whatever. It's just like all of it's the same thing. It gets very repetitive, actually.
Yes, and the last major point I want to make before moving on with this is that much more than this notion of being conditioned for this super powered one world leader. Entertainment these days is much more conditioning its viewers to believe in unbiblical ideologies and concepts that have to do with, for example, uh, existential self-expressionism, especially in the most recent Disney movies, for example. Like that is the
Oh yeah.
moral message of the film. It's like it is the summum bonum, it is the supreme good of your entire existence to be able to express how you feel in the way that you feel, because that the way you feel is who you are,
Yeah.
and that is your right, and no one should be able to say otherwise.
It's yeah, getting into your sort of the Sartre, the Sartre
Yeah,
philosophy, the will, you
existentialism.
create
Yes,
reality yourself. And well, once again, you're getting into the transgenderism, you're getting into the
exactly.
LGBTQ stuff, right? Because reality must bend to your whim and your personal desire on how you want to see the world. Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
and that's a much more biblically substantiated, like if we were to connect the conditioning of viewers of entertainment with those kinds of philosophical pagan ideas, if we were to connect that with Satan and
Yeah,
and the temptation of the serpent, that
you will be
connection
God.
is yeah is very very much biblically substantiated. We can make
Yeah,
biblical arguments for that, especially as to demonic influences in the principalities and powers that influence worldly philosophy and false religious thought.
yeah.
But to take that to the next level and say, basically, to interpret movies with with a dispensational hermeneutic of how we interpret Revelation is an
Yeah.
entire, like a
When all the
giant
things said
leap.
applies to all of human history,
Yes, it is just
bar no period.
so like unfounded, and
Yeah.
this just gets into what we talked about earlier in this video, just how
It's
like
like when the stuff
sensationalized.
it's like when the stuff coming at us is so much more corrosive and so much more malignantly hateful in terms of how much it hates God and his created order. This is the thing you want to pick out. This is the
Right.
thing. All right, this is the big part.
He will have godlike powers. And people are being programmed right now to accept that man.
Yeah, do we want to wrap up for the
Yeah,
right
I
here?
just want to see. Okay, false church. That's it. Yeah, that's good. We
Yeah,
can wrap up.
this will be a good one. It's getting more interesting.